meeting of the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology of the House of Commons, pursuant to Standing Order 108.2 and the motion adopted by the committee Tuesday, March 1, 2022. The committee is meeting to study quantum computing. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of November 25, 2021. Members are attending in person or by Zoom. And for those who are here in person in Ottawa, you know the health rules that apply, so please act accordingly. Now it is a pleasure to welcome for the first hour, because we'll have two panels today, to start this study on quantum computing. For the first hour, we have with us from the Department of Industry, Mr. Vatt, Dr. Vatt, Assistant Deputy Minister of Research, Science and Research Sector, and Dr. Geneviève Tanguay, Vice President, Emerging Technologies. So without further ado, before moving on to the questions, I would like to ask our witnesses to please go ahead and give their presentations on the subject today, and thank you for being here. I'd like to start with Dr. Vatt for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Nipun Vatt. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Science and Research Sector at ISED, as was mentioned. In this role, I'm responsible for policy and programs related to federal funding of post-secondary research and for fostering connections between research and its downstream economic and societal benefits. It's in this context that my group is responsible for coordinating the National Quantum Strategy that was announced by the government in the 2021 federal budget.
I would like to start by giving an overview of quantum computing in Canada. Canada is a leader in the field of quantum science, and this was made possible through investments in the long term in applied research that enabled Canadian talent to move forward with new innovations in quantum science and technology.
Quantum S&T is akin to the Canadian experience with artificial intelligence, although in general, quantum science is a broader field and an earlier stage of development in a number of key areas of application. Over time, we've sought to amplify these strengths with strategic larger scale investments in research. In total, over the past 10 years, the federal government has invested just over $1 billion in our quantum ecosystem. This includes both funding for investigator-led projects as well as initiatives such as the Canada First Research Excellence Fund, which has provided large-scale funding to Canadian institutions to achieve world-class status in quantum and in other domains.
Canada now has a growing ecosystem with quantum expertise centers and universities across the country and companies that have done world first and solid investments in the private sector, including risk capital, including foreign source venture capital. While Canada's quantum ecosystem extends from coast to coast, there are 4 major centers of quantum expertise across the country, mostly clustered around universities.
Region, which has strengths in quantum information, communications, and sensors, with a range of commercialization accelerators and incubators, and also boasts companies like Xanadu and Renovus. There's also the Institute for Quantum Computing housed at the University of Waterloo, which is the largest institution of its kind in the world. The Greater Montreal, Sherbrooke, and Quebec City corridor is anchored by work in quantum hardware and devices, and companies engaged in this ecosystem include IBM, Anion Systems, and SB Quantum. The Calgary-Edmonton corridor has expertise in nanotechnology and enabling technologies, and Alberta is building a provincial quantum network, Quantum Alberta, to encourage and accelerate the commercialization of quantum technologies. And in the Greater Vancouver region, the focus includes quantum materials, algorithms, and hardware development, and Quantum BC plays a key role in convening provincial stakeholders. One local BC company, D-Wave, was an early leader globally in quantum computing and has made significant strides recently in terms of investment and commercialization of its technologies. There
is a lot of complementarity in the strengths of these hubs and a range of collaborations between academic researchers, startups, and larger, more established companies and government labs. This positions Canada's quantum ecosystem well for future success. While Canada has strengths in many different areas, and we are particularly known for our work in quantum computing, quantum communications, and post-quantum cryptography. From the previous examples, you can see computers figure prominently in Canada's quantum landscape.
That I haven't mentioned yet is that Canadian quantum talent is recognized and sought all over the world. And this is why focusing on the talent pipeline will help us leverage quantum's enormous potential for commercialization, but also provide direct benefits to Canadians. À ce stade du développement de l'écosystème quantique,
At this stage in the development of the quantum ecosystem, the next step is to build up our efforts strategically to help Canadian researchers and companies seize opportunities as they arise. Due to the complexity of quantum technologies, they cannot be developed in any single country. As such, international collaboration is also very important. Canadian researchers and companies have been very active in these collaborations, which, to date, have occurred mainly at the researcher level, but could also benefit from greater coordination. Given this context, in Budget 2021, the Government of Canada announced the development of a national quantum strategy and a commitment of $360 million over 7 years, starting in 2021-22, as a next step to build out Canada's quantum ecosystem and ensure that Canadian scientists and entrepreneurs are prepared for the quantum era.
Amplify Canada's significant strength in quantum research, grow our quantum-ready technologies and companies and talent, and solidify Canada's global leadership in this domain. The budget announcement and investment is about doubling down in those areas, in those strengths in ways that are more strategic and foster better connections between our centers of expertise across the country, all while recognizing Canada's expertise and potential economic benefits from these technologies.
In order to develop the National Quantum Strategy, ICED held consultations in 2021 and recently published What We Heard report, which highlights the importance of international collaboration, foreign talent and investment, and exporting to international markets to support the growth of our quantum market. It also notes that for Canada to remain a leader in quantum collaboration between academia, industry, and government, both domestically and internationally, is required.
Investments under the strategy have already started to move forward under each pillar. For example, NSERC, the National Sciences and Engineering Research Council, has recently launched and announced a number of programs related to training and research, and has a number of collaborations with the European Commission and the U.S. National Science Foundation. And as my colleague will likely get into, the National Research Council has also launched calls in a number of areas. In parallel, the government is developing a national quantum strategy document that will help further focus current and future investments to position Canada to lead in key areas of strength and opportunity in quantum technology over the coming years. Mr. Chair, I'm mindful of time. I know that you'd suggested 6 minutes, and the next part of what I was going to say was on quantum computing. Although I know your second hour, you have some leading experts in quantum computing who probably could speak to that far better than I could. So if you wanted to move on to the next set of remarks, I'd be happy to stop here and just open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Vatz. We'll do that, and perhaps some will come up in the questioning later on. So, je passerai maintenant la parole à Madame.
Now I'll give the floor to Ms. Tanguay. Thank you very much, Chair, for having invited me to speak to you today about the National Research Council of Canada as part of your study on quantum computing. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the National Research Council's facilities are on traditional unceded territories of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I would also like to add that I am currently located on unceded Algonquin, Anishinaabe, or Huron-Wendat, land. So it is a privilege to be able to conduct research and drive innovation on these lands and pay respect to the people who were here before us. My name is Dr. Geneviève Tanguay, as you said, and I am the Vice President of the Emerging Technologies Division at the NRC. In a number of research centers under my responsibility, including the Advanced Electronics and Photonics, the Hertzberg Astronomy and Astrophysics Center, as well as the Centers of Research on Metrology, Nanotechnology, and Security and Disruptive Technologies. After a doctorate in parasitology, I've worked in various institutions such as Universities Canada, Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, and the Centre québécois de valorisation des biotechnologies. Much of my work has been dedicated to promoting technology and innovation transfer, and from 2007 to 2011, I held the position of Assistant Deputy Minister for Research, Innovation and Science and Society with the Government of Quebec. After that, I was Vice Rector, Research at Université de Montréal before joining the NRC for my current duties.
Federal research and development organization with a national footprint that includes laboratories in 22 locations spread across every province of the country. En plus de réaliser leur propre recherche.
In addition to doing their own advanced research, our scientists, engineers, and business experts partner with universities, colleges, and Canadian industry to help take research and technologies from the lab to the marketplace. We serve a unique role at NRC. It joins together the diverse parts of Canada's research ecosystem, responding to public policy priorities and creating opportunities that benefit Canadians. Over the past 5 years, we have implemented a plan to revitalize and sustain the NRC's role at the forefront of research and innovation. This plan, among other things, has resulted in the creation of 9 collaboration centers with universities and other partners in areas as varied as quantum photonics, ocean technologies, green energy, AI, and cybersecurity. In addition, we are pursuing research excellence through support for exploratory work and moving ahead in certain disruptive technologies to ensure a more diverse workforce, revitalizing our NRC research environment, and aligning with industrial priorities in key innovation clusters.
NRC's effort in quantum research. Through our collaborative science, technology, and innovation program, we aim to bring together the best minds from academia, industry, and government to deliver game-changing scientific discoveries and technological breakthroughs across the innovation continuum. These cross-sector collaborative challenge programs address current and emerging government priorities to be achieved over a 7-year time frame. Of our many challenge programs, 2 of the most recent ones to emerge focus on quantum. They are the Internet of Things Quantum Sensors Program and the Applied Quantum Computing Program. Launched in 2021, the goal of the Internet of Things Quantum Sensors Program is to enable the development of revolutionary sensors that harness the extreme sensitivity of quantum systems to provide enhanced precision, sensitivity, rates, and range of measurable phenomena. The ambition is that this new generation of sensor systems performing beyond the limits of classical physics may be engineered and commercialized for applications that benefit Canadians. To date, we have 47 agreements under development with many industry partners. The main areas of focus for this challenge are quantum photonics, chip-based quantum systems, and quantum metrology. NRC's most recent challenge program, which will be launching in 22-23, will be concentrating on applied quantum computing. The goal of the challenge will be to support commercial and government innovations in quantum algorithms and applied quantum computing. The program is being developed in alignment with the development of the Government of Canada's National Quantum Strategy Nippon just spoke about. It will support quantum initiatives across the Government of Canada, working with federal departments, agencies, and crown corporations to explore applications of quantum computing for public service operations and program delivery. The anticipated areas of focus are quantum algorithms, quantum simulations, and models and architecture. Nous avons également un thème en communication.
We also have a theme on quantum communications in a third challenge program on secured high-rate networks aiming to develop and deploy quantum communications, including quantum key distribution and the satellite quantum communications. By taking on these challenges, we hope to support Canada's ambition to grow quantum-ready technologies, companies, and talent, and solidify Canada's global leadership in this area. Thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Tanguay. So for our first round of questions, I'll give the floor to Ms. Gray for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I'll start my questions with Dr. Vats. I understand in Budget 2021 the government intended to develop the National Quantum Strategy. What is the date the strategy will be launched?
Thank you for the question. So I guess there's two parts to that answer. One is, when it comes to the investments relating to the strategy, those are already being announced. So the actual kind of programmatic elements that will drive the objectives of the strategy have already been announced to some extent. For example, I believe it was last week that the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council announced an investment of about 138 million out of the National Quantum Strategy for a range of programming under the Alliance program, and which is focused on research, larger scale research and collaboration amongst centers of research and industry, as well as funding for specific training programs under NSERC's CREATE program. The actual strategy document, which will inform the future rounds of investment under those programs, but also that could provide a bit of a longer term direction with respect to quantum in Canada, is currently under development. And so there's no definitive date for announcement of the strategy document as of yet.
Great, thank you. Do you know if the funding that was announced as you mentioned, was that allocated through Budget 2021, or was that new spending, or did the money come from somewhere else?
So the amount that I mentioned from NSERC was from the Budget 2021 investment, yes, as is some of the funding that's going towards the NRC Challenge programs that Dr. Tanguay mentioned.
Okay, and since we're still at the beginning stages of developing the strategy, as you had mentioned, how was this funding determined to fit into the strategy, since the strategy isn't developed yet? And where did this funding suggestion come from?
Well, there's a fairly long history to this point with respect to the development of the strategy. So prior to Budget 2021, there was an extended consultation amongst the research and industrial community in the quantum ecosystem to develop some recommendations on the types of investments that would be required to kind of take the quantum sector in Canada forward. So the programmatic elements that were kind of identified under Budget 2021 were really informed by that input that was provided by the Canadian quantum community. Now, the programs themselves have a certain degree of flexibility in terms of how the funding can be focused, and so the idea is, that investments are starting under those buckets, informed by that long consultation process. But that we would be able to refine that, as we move forward, as informed by the strategy document.
Okay, thank you. So would that have been from those roundtables that were held last year? Is that sort of where that flowed out of?
Well, there were so the government's consultations were the roundtables last year. There was actually a community-driven consultation process that was conducted even prior to the budget investment. So there was a lot of stakeholder input even before the budget, but then to better focus our thinking with respect to the programs and to the longer term plan, the government conducted a series of roundtables over last summer. Great,
thank you. Doctor, are you able to table with the committee the target metrics and the dates to meet those targets from the announcement of the strategy that was on March 15th, just recently, to the date the strategy will be launched? Are you able to table those metrics and what the dates are as you're developing your strategy?
Well, I mean, I can maybe I could just sort of. I'm not sure exactly what pieces. I mean, with respect to the programs, there are definitive kind of timelines, like in terms of what's been launched, when applications will be due, when decisions would be taken. The strategy as a policy document is something that I don't have a definitive sort of time for. But if it was with respect to the program pieces that have been announced, I think there'd be no problem in providing that to the committee.
Great. Thank you very much. Has the minister directed you or your department to work with your provincial counterparts in ensuring the quantum strategy also considers post-secondary training in this field?
Well, I would say generally we have been working very closely with provincial governments on the quantum strategy writ large. I mean, I know, and as I mentioned in my comments, in my remarks initially, there is a lot going on in a lot of different parts of the country. So when it comes to the governments, particularly in those provinces that have a large concentration of effort in quantum, so BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, we have been working very closely with those governments to make sure that what we're doing is complementing what they're doing. On the training side, that's been one component that has been discussed amongst many. So it has been part of those discussions.
Great. Thank you very much. One other quick question. Has the minister directed you or your department to ensure security and privacy are a pillar of the future national quantum strategy?
So yes, this is coming. So in the consultations we had last summer, there was a framing document that talked about the importance of security, and in fact, our roundtables one of the roundtables was focused on security issues. And with respect to the programs that are rolling out, there are actually security provisions embedded within those programs, specifically the Alliance program that I mentioned in NSERC. And the NRC also has, security due diligence sort of built into its program suite. So both in terms of policy and in terms of programmatic measures, there are, security is clearly an important issue in this space. And so it is kind of integrated into the approach.
Thank you, MP Gray. Thank you, Mr. Vats. I'll now turn to MP Dong for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Vats and Dr. Tungay for your time coming to the committee. And I don't think I ever had a chance to thank my colleagues on the committee for supporting this very interesting study. So my first question, I'm pleased to hear that Canada has a national quantum strategy and couple it with $360 million over 7 years. But comparing to other large worlds that are competing in this technology, I see the research that China is investing $15.3 billion 5 years, United States 1.27, and I think Russia is 571 over 5 years. Through the consultation and feedback from the industry, is the support from the government and the strategy as well adequate to adequate in the research field of this quantum technology?
Well, maybe I can give my
Yes,
comments, and then Geneviève, if you have anything to add, or Mr. Chair, if my colleague has anything to add, maybe she could do so as well. So I guess what I would say is the quantum strategy is built on top of a number of investments that are already ongoing. So I mentioned the $1 billion over the last 10 years. That those investments. A number of those investments continue through things like these large-scale institutional research investments through the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. There's in fact another round of that program that has been launched, where we could expect further investment in quantum. The quantum strategy funding, is really focused on some of the key pieces that are needed to accelerate the development beyond that foundational funding, which is already quite significant with respect to quantum. So things like, making sure that we have very strong training programs in the country to create that pipeline of talent we need, or enabling institutions and companies to scale up their R&D. Because with some of these quantum technologies, proof of principle on a small scale is nowhere near the same thing as trying to build something at a commercial scale. And so those are the types of investments that this additional funding is focused on. If you were to ask the research community, is the funding sufficient? I expect the answer you'd get is probably not. But I think we're trying to be very, very focused in terms of trying to address those gaps that we think are really needed at this point in time, to make sure that we can continue to be competitive internationally with respect to quantum.
I'm not suggesting that we need to compete with these giant countries. We're a middle power country, but thinking about nuclear technology, Canada has a very unique advantage, whether it's heavy water, whether uranium we use. Do you think that going forward, Canadian quantum computing industry will gain that unique competitive advantage over research that's happening in other countries?
Well, I mean, I think that's our hope and our intent. Certainly, is to make sure that we can, that we're capturing these benefits for Canada. I think a lot of it, you need a very strong foundation to make sure that you continue to attract, economic investment in an emerging technology field. So we've been very good at investing.
I got a very important question. I just want to get it in.
Oh, sure.
But I understand where you're coming from. We can't talk about commercialization of quantum computing without talking about semiconductors. In the State of the Union address by President Biden, Ohio is, with the help of Intel, is going to have a mega site for semiconductor production. And we all know that it's a national security issue, it's a national economy issue. Has your department or anyone from the government reach out to Intel and say, hey, look north, we have great use for these future semiconductors and perhaps boost our semiconductor manufacturing capacity?
So with respect to that question, I think my colleague, Dr. Tanguay, might actually be better positioned to respond because the NRC has a fairly important role with respect to semiconductor fabrication. So if I may, Mr. Chair, if it's okay to turn to Dr. Tanguay, I think that might be a better, you maybe get a better answer.
Yes, of course. Madame Tanguay.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Facility within the NRC that does provide semiconductors to industry. And we have also a facility that's working on quantum artifacts. So, for example, we're working with quantum dot lasers, quantum sensors, quantum repeaters, and gates, just to name a few of the applications that we have. And I know that you just reviewed also critical minerals. Well, critical minerals are also very important for the type of semiconductors that we do, which are compound semiconductors. So we use helium, graphite, tungsten, indium, gallium, germanium, chromium, aluminum, nickel. And so a panoply of metals are being used for the semiconductors, of critical minerals are being used for semiconductors. So this is very important.
Yeah, I'm talking about the semiconductor manufacturing capacity in Canada. Right now, I look around, there isn't anything sizable to support the future economy.
Brief answer, Madame Tanguay, if you wish.
Très brève. On espère.
Very briefly, we hope to attract foreign investment precisely in order to have them come and join us in our efforts in semiconductors, composite semiconductors that I just described. So we are hoping to attract someone.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dong. And now I'll turn over the floor to MP Lemire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my first question starts from an article from the Electric Vehicles Association of Quebec, in which it says that according to a Korean study, there might be electric vehicles recharged at home instead of 10 hours in 3 minutes, or rapid charging going from 30 minutes to 9 seconds through quantum techniques. So I'd like to ask you that question specifically to Dr. Vatz of the Department of Industry. I'd like to know whether this shift toward batteries and the ecological shift has an important weight in the national quantum strategy and in the Department of Industry. Is this something being prioritized?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So I would say, with respect to the quantum strategy specifically, we're quantum materials is an important part of the quantum ecosystem. So we have centers of expertise across the country that are focused on quantum materials, and quantum materials can be applied to a range of different things, whether it's quantum computing, whether it's advanced solar cell technologies or batteries. And so through these investments, that is one of the channels that could be pursued by companies or by researchers. For the department as a whole, I would, I can't speak, for all aspects of the department, but it's pretty clear that battery technologies and green vehicles are a pretty high priority, as was seen even, on the industrial scale through a recent announcement, of a large facility in Ontario. So both from a research perspective and from an industrial perspective, I would say battery technologies and next generation battery technologies are going to continue to be a priority for the department.
Merci.
Thank you. Regarding the national quantum strategy of the federal government, we heard, first of all, announcements before the strategy was announced and publicized. That's something which I wonder about, how the quantum strategy of national defense fits into the national quantum strategy also. So I would like to ask you that question.
Thank you for the question. So, there are clearly some specific defense-focused priorities that Department of Defense would have with respect to quantum technologies. I would say that the programs that we've launched under the National Quantum Strategy, they actually enable collaboration with the Department of Defense, so that we can actually leverage what they're doing and more strongly connect what they're doing with the academic research community, with industry, to make sure that as our defense establishment is looking to, develop needed quantum technologies in Canada, that they're better linked to the research community and to companies, so that you can actually be, you can be pulling those technologies to market. There's, and with respect to the longer term, we've been working very closely with defense and other departments to make sure that as a national quantum strategy comes together, it is actually an integrated initiative, so that it actually brings together all of these different pieces where specific departments may have specific interests with respect to quantum, to make sure that we're all speaking with one voice, and therefore can better leverage the capabilities of the government to support Canadian research and industry in this area.
Donc, je vois.
So I note that this is something which is emerging and that could develop quite substantially in the coming years. However, on page 6 of the document that summarizes what the people who were consulted said, the overall amount of financing for the National Quantum Strategy could be insufficient to fulfill our goals, especially because in other countries they promise to invest substantially more. Could you give us an indication of the possible impacts of research and work, and how far can we go in that?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, I think in the sense that it'll really be up to the researchers and the companies to determine how far they can go in terms of these new innovations. I would say that one of the things that we're trying to do through the strategy is actually work smarter, to kind of better connect what we already have in the country that's funded through a fairly strong base of basic research funding, to better enable our centers of quantum expertise to work together, to better connect what our startup companies are doing to capabilities that are resident in institutions across the country, and to be more deliberate in terms of how we pursue international collaboration. So it's really hard for me to say, how far we can go. I mean, I think over time, it's clear we'll need more investment in this space, both the private sector and government investment. But I think, one of the advantages we have as a country when you go internationally and talk about quantum research and quantum R&D is that, we tend to appreciate collaboration across disciplines more than other countries sometimes do. We're small enough that we can actually have a very strong collaborative relationship between companies and the basic research sector, and that can take you pretty far in a space like this. So I can't speak to the specific technology outcomes, but I can certainly say that we're trying to incent more of that kind of collaboration that can really catalyze some of these innovations here at home.
J'ai hâte de voir ce que vous allez.
I look forward to what you'll decide on and make recommendations. And Chair, I won't be able to ask my question on intellectual property. Is that right? We'll come back to you, Mr. Lemire. And now I'll give the floor to Mr. Massé for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our guests to be here today. And my question, the first one to start with, is on facial recognition, and allow both of you to get in on this. And with the way the research is being done right now, is there any commitment to or thought about how that can actually be applied to not only just the private sector, but also the public sector, so the border and other types of government services that are provided. I'm just kind of curious as to whether there's even direction for that or whether that's happened. As we look at research and more grants and development, I'm just wondering whether this is actually coming back to the public sector in any aspect with the direction. Facial recognition is one that I'm a little bit interested in, having toured some of the sites even 15 years ago that was doing initial work on that, and the advancement's been unbelievable. We actually vote now in the House of Commons through facial recognition, so on our handheld devices. So I'll turn it over, but I'd love to hear from both of our guests here today.
Thank you for the question. So when it comes to kind of technologies like facial recognition, which is largely based on machine learning and artificial intelligence sort of based advances that have happened in the last number of years, they're not, there are relationships to quantum technology, but, with respect to machine learning, but more generally, when it comes to AI, there has been a fairly big investment in Canada over the last 10 years with respect to doubling down on the fact that we have very strong, some of the pioneers of that kind of research are really here in Canada. And, through investments such as the Pan-Canadian Artificial Intelligence Strategy, which was also renewed in budget 2021. We're trying to actually invest in the researchers, invest in training the people who can actually implement those kinds of technologies, and also we're investing in understanding the societal impacts of these technologies, because the flip side of the efficiencies that can be gained through facial recognition is the potential impacts on bias, security, privacy, that you need to be very mindful of. So those are things that we're funding on the research side. With respect to the specific application of those technologies for government, our Treasury Board Secretariat has been trying to develop some principles that could guide how you could do things like use those technologies for autonomous decision making in a way that respects some of these values that we all share around making sure that people's privacy is protected, making sure that we try and eliminate bias if we're going to try and use mechanistic kind of tools to try and identify how to take decisions and so on. So there is certainly work going on in that space, although it isn't something that my department is. We are certainly implicated through privacy legislation and other things, but it's largely directed out of our Treasury Board Secretariat.
J'ai pas grand-chose à ajouter.
I don't have much to add, apart from the fact that many groups are now looking into ethics as it applies to quantum technologies, as much as to artificial intelligence, which is now being used a lot for facial recognition.
Great. Thank you very much for that. That's one of the interesting aspects that I think a lot of people are going to see this in more of their, like a direct correlation to their life, and that's how they might get more interested even into the quantum element. It's kind of like explaining to people what a spectrum auction is. It gets very sleepy for some people really quick. No offense, but I do want to ask though about how do we keep our Canadian researchers and our ground game here if we're going to lose people internationally. I'm just curious about that aspect, because I've seen in my region, tool and die mold making, for example, where there was an attempt to kind of poach some of our best people, and it's been a challenge to keep the younger people and so forth. And just wondering if you both have some thoughts on how we can best do that and continue to punch above our weight.
Well, thank you for that question as well, and it's one that we really think a lot about, because our ability to actually seize the benefits of these technologies over time really relies on having that pipeline of talent, and it's what having the researchers here means that you can train the students. It means that companies are interested in setting their home bases here in Canada, because the natural resource in these emerging technology areas is people, and so if you have that pipeline of people, then that really drives your success. So a lot of these things that we're doing through these large investments in research are really also with a mind towards what the downstream benefits will be, just by creating that pipeline. So research funding, funding for training for students and postdoctoral fellows, and then connecting those companies in our ecosystem to that pool of talent, so that they, that they have a place to go, they can plug into as they complete their education, I think are all really important pieces that we kind of need to stay on. Like, it's a constant effort, because when you talk to people around the world, they recognize Canadian talent in this space. Anywhere you go, any of the top institutions in the world, they will say, "Oh yes, we have students who were at Sherbrooke, or at or people who are at Sherbrooke or at Waterloo, or wherever." And I think some of that is good, that we're actually learning more by having Canadians go abroad, but we want to bring them back too. So I think that's a critical piece of the puzzle for sure.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vatz. And now I'll give the floor to Mr. Lewis for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the very excellent dialogue here so far today. When I was invited to come here on behalf of MP Gerard Jatel, I didn't quite know what quantum computing was all about, to be honest with you. And so because of that, I really dived into it with all 4 feet, so to speak. And then I realized just how close it was to international trade. So I probably could go on for an hour, but I only have 5 minutes. So I'm gonna get right down to it. Dr. Vatz, you had mentioned that quantum computing cannot be developed in any single country. And I found that really remarkable. So my riding of Essex is right next to Mr. Massey's riding of Windsor West. And so there's a lot of international travelers every single day. And so I'm wondering, can you please let me know, as far as you know, with regard to Huawei? Here's my concern, Doctor, is Huawei, let's just for a moment imagine that Huawei was allowed in Canada and wasn't allowed in the United States. So if we have vehicles, autonomous vehicles that cross our bridge each and every single day, what would that look like? And what is the government doing to ensure that the crossing the border is going to be free and clear with whatever way that both countries go?
Well, thank you for the question. I mean, I guess the most important thing, I think, in terms of these collaborations from that perspective, from that security perspective, is that we make sure that we're engaging with our trusted partners in a way that we can actually have interoperability, right? So and that's true for at earlier stages of research, it's less of a contentious issue because it's very kind of fundamental in nature, maybe doesn't have as much of a technological implication. But as you get further downstream, you need to think about how you're going to make sure that the technology you're developing will be able to plug into supply chains internationally, and it's so that is something that's being discussed in terms of standards, in terms of whether we have appropriate security kind of understandings with our allies when it comes to some of these more sensitive security technologies. And a lot of that is things that those types of things are things that we're also trying to do in parallel with these investments through the strategy, is to make sure that we're strengthening those.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, yeah. Doctor.
No, please.
Officer. I'm very sorry. But with regard to allies, so are we suggesting then that China's our ally?
Well, no, I'm sorry. I was talking about Canada-U.S. border.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But
I
was speaking specifically to Huawei. So do you have any thoughts on that front?
Well, I'll give you an example. Like in the Alliance program, which is one of the key delivery vehicles for the quantum strategy when it comes to research, there are some research security provisions that are built into that program, which basically require that we understand, where there are industrial partners involved, whether those partners kind of meet the norms of, sort of international norms in terms of transparency, openness, state control, and other factors. And so these are things that we're actually reviewing when research proposals are brought forward through that program. So,
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. I'm gonna move off that. Thank you very much. So with regard to international trade, then, in regards to the CUSMA and CETA, and looking ahead to our trade agreement with the UK, will quantum computing be a part of those agreements? And if it's not already, and so number one, do we need to amend those agreements at all in regards to quantum computing?
Well, I'm not an international trade expert, I have to admit. You know, I would say, you know, there are typically provisions in those agreements with respect to, you know, trade in goods, services, procurement, as well as provisions related to, you know, national security, which I think would all be relevant to quantum. But I don't know whether you would need quantum-specific provisions in an international trade agreement, particularly because you know this is a space where the technology is still evolving, and so in general, you want to try and have you know a framework of general application that'll allow, you know, Canadian innovations to have access to those markets. So it might be a bit premature to be thinking about the specific kind of tweaks you need to international agreements from that perspective.
Thank you, Doctor. Chair, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Is it all done? Thank you.
You're done. You have no time left. I'll now move to Mr. Erskine Smith for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks for your presentations. We could have a long conversation about basic research, but I actually want to talk about commercialization, because in the What We Heard report, they note that Canada has a history of producing excellent research that often does not get commercialized. That doesn't only apply to quantum, that applies across the board, unfortunately. And in the quantum space, we see a few different kinds of investments. So we see from the NRC these challenges, obviously identifying mission-driven priorities and saying any companies can compete for this. But in other contexts, we have large public funding for specific organizations. We saw 40 million, for example, to D-Wave in March of 2021. And in the What We Heard report, there's an acknowledgement, there was consensus that government should remain inclusive and not pick winners at this time, as quantum is a developing sector. That seems right. At some point, Canada will need to make a strategic decision whether to support a few large players or projects or many small ones. Given money is being rolled out the door already as part of 360 million, what's the answer to that question?
Well, I mean, when it comes to quantum computing, you know, we're still at a relatively early stage in many ways, right? So I think when you talk about the need to kind of not be picking a lane at this point in quantum computing, I think that's probably right. We have a number of players within Canada who, you know, who are all pursuing slightly different approaches and sometimes very different approaches to achieving, you know, the ultimate goal, which is this quantum computer that can correct for errors so that you can do some really meaningful real world types of calculations on them. So, you know, it may be the case that one or two or more technologies actually emerge as being the most likely to achieve that goal of what's called fault tolerant quantum computing.
But less. So sorry to cut you off at limited time, but less interested in sort of us picking a technological winner, but more to the latter point. When the What We Heard report says at some point Canada will need to make a strategic decision whether to support a few large players or projects or many small ones. Given money is rolling out the door, have we arrived at the conclusion? What's the strategic decision?
Well, I guess what I'm saying with respect to quantum computing, that we're still at that early stage where we're not at the point where we'd be in a position to pick winners because, or a small number of investments, because you know, the race is still on and we're still at a fairly early stage in development. So I think it would be unfortunate at this point to be closing doors that look like viable candidates for a quantum computer. It may be the case, though, as the report says, that we may arrive at a point where you know, we have to make some of those decisions, or the markets will kind of dictate, or you know, technology will dictate.
Well, let me take a step back, but a similar problem, right? Because the report also acknowledges, I think many people in many businesses and responses acknowledge that Canada has a venture capital climate that tends to be highly risk averse, that we see companies, a lot of basic research that happens in Canada, but people leave to find financing elsewhere. Venture capital is more easily found in other countries, potentially. When you look at the approach of funding large companies, which may well be at a place that are more easily able to access capital in the private sector and private markets versus early stage companies exiting from research and trying to commercialize. Is that not a space where Canada, there's a gap there potentially that Canada with public dollars maybe ought to fill?
No, I think that's true. I think there are programs that are doing that right now. I mean, you mentioned the investment in D-Wave. That was done through the Strategic Innovation Fund, which is for those kind of companies at a certain threshold level.
But pause there, because is it? I don't know. Is it really for those companies? D-Wave strikes me as a company that is much more established than what I'm imagining. When you're thinking of the really startup space that are exiting the incubators and looking for capital, venture capital in the private market, D-Wave seems a little more advanced than that.
Yeah, that's true. So if we were to walk through kind of that translational space, right? So you have, I think the first, I don't know how much, we don't have a lot of time, but like the first barrier is the scientist who's trying to figure out what my product is. And there's some questions about whether we actually have the tools we need to help a scientist innovator kind of define the economic opportunity of the product and then develop a business that can actually succeed in raising capital. So even before you get to the traditional incubator stage, there's work that could be done there. And there are a number of places that are doing that work. When you are a small startup firm, it's partly about the kind of the C-suite kind of expertise. It's also partly making sure you have strong connections to the research base that can help support your innovation in an emerging tech area. And we have programs like IRAP at the NRC, which actually provide funding and expertise to help those companies. Then as you go further sort of downstream, then at a certain there's some specific things that companies may be looking for. For example, it may be the case that there are common platforms or test beds that could be deployed to help them test some of these technologies, whether they're in sensors, whether they're in computing infrastructure and other things, and looking at ways to kind of support those, that again are not necessarily picking winners, but give them a leg up in terms of being able to test. And then as you get further downstream, you get to programs like SIF, where people are at a scale where they can actually, they're bringing in Series B investment or whatever, and they need, they want some supportive investment. We also have the BDC Deep Tech Fund, which is another sort of venture capital vehicle that can provide support in that space. So there are a number of different pieces that already exist in the system. I think one of the things that we're looking at through the quantum strategies, how do we actually kind of tie them together, particularly in an emerging tech area like this, to make sure that that our companies can connect all of those tools in an efficient way, and that we have line of sight on how they're progressing, so that we can help them along. So,
and where the gaps are. Thanks,
Yeah.
Dr. Vats. I really appreciate your contribution.
Yes, thank you very much. We'll now move to Mr. Lemire for 2.5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président.
Chair, I noticed that you have a very lovely tie on today. In connection with the questions of my colleague Erskine Smith, I would like to deal with the issue of intellectual property, which seems to me fundamental, especially in an emerging sector. How is IP being handled in that sector in Canada?
Well, thank you for the question. When it comes to intellectual property that's generated in universities, universities themselves have their own kind of approaches to management of intellectual property, and they have different models. Some are owned by the researcher, some are owned by the institution and licensed to the researcher, and they're looking at ways to sort of maximize the economic potential of the IP that's generated here in Canada. When it comes to companies, of course, I can't speak to the individual companies' decisions here, but a lot of it is dependent on their sort of their business strategy. In some cases, like in quantum algorithms, it may be that the key is not the IP itself, but being the first to seize a space, as is often the case in software. When it comes to some of the hardware innovations, I think IP is a much more important piece of the puzzle. I believe some of the speakers in the second hour actually would have pretty good understanding of those issues as well. And I know we don't have very much time. Our goal always is to try and make sure that, while respecting business decisions, that you can maximize the retention of that IP here in Canada, particularly in the areas where where the federal government is investing. But I think you have to look at it in the context of, how companies deploy IP to ensure their future growth as well. And so there are strategic decisions that companies need to make with respect to that. So IP is a very is a pretty deep, as you know, is a very deep kind of strategic kind of asset that you need to think about.
Accordingly, in light of the spying that occurs from hostile countries and even possibly the Canadian Space Agency, how do we bring in means to protect ourselves sufficiently against that?
Rapidement.
Briefly.
So very quickly, when it comes to both for the academic sector and for industry, Canadian industry, there's been a lot of effort over the last couple of years to do a lot of outreach, training on for researchers. It's even like what could someone want to steal that I have? Do you have the right protections in terms of cybersecurity? So there's cybersecurity work. Same thing with companies. Organizations in the security agencies are going to companies directly to kind of make sure that they are providing them with training and advice to ensure that they have the right kind of protections in place to make sure that you're minimizing the risk of exfiltration of Canadian innovation. So it's a very active area for the federal government right now, from the research perspective and from industry. And I think Geneviève has something she wanted to add.
I'm sorry, Madame Tanguay. I'll have to stop it there if we want to go to our last questioner, Mr. Moss, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. And I'll let Madame Tanguay please go ahead, because Monsieur Lemire was actually heading in a direction on cybersecurity where I was going too. So that's very good. So I'll let her get her response in.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I can tell you that the level of security is very high at the NRC, and all employees have to go through security verification. So for that purpose, we're quite strict, and we also do it for people who come in who are visitors. We do this in the case of companies that we work with in order to make sure that if we transfer them something, it's not going to go directly to another country. So there are more and more measures being taken by research organizations to ensure security of the research that is developed here.
Is there work being done as well with regards to training Canadians that you know of? Like, I know Coding for Veterans is a program to go through with regards to getting Canadians into the cybersecurity forum. Is that happening as part of this too? Because as we're investing more into this, it's going to be a real challenge. It's also a real opportunity. Coding for Veterans has been very, very successful at this. And I'm just wondering if there are any thoughts about how we also to continue to train like the practical job elements that are necessary beyond the research and development.
Yes, thanks for the question. Maybe briefly, I would say we when it comes to cybersecurity and quantum as part of that, there's a program that was launched last year called the Cybersecurity Innovation Network, which basically is to fund collaborations between universities and industry, as well as training programs across the country. And colleges to some extent are involved in that as well, I believe, to make sure that research is being done at universities and training that's being done at universities actually targets the needs of Canadian industry when it comes to cybersecurity. So that's a complement. I mean, that's more focused on cybersecurity specifically, but that's a complement to what we're doing here through the strategy, because cybersecurity and quantum and cybersecurity are quite strongly linked in some ways, and so that is an important piece of the puzzle.
Merci beaucoup, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Vatz. Madame Tanguay, that's all the time we have. Thank you for being here to launch this study on quantum computing. We will have to break off for a few moments to bring in our witnesses for the second panel. Thank you both. And so I'll suspend the meeting for Thank you to our witnesses for joining us. We have today for this second hour Dr. Alexandre Blais, Professor, Scientific Director, Quantum Institute, University of Sherbrooke, and Dr. Norbert Lütkenhaus, who is Executive Director, Institute for Quantum Computing, University of Waterloo. Thank you for being there. And finally, Dr. Sanders, who is Professor and Scientific Director, Institute for Quantum Science and Technology, Institute of University of Calgary. Thank you for being here this Friday afternoon. We really appreciate it. So I'll let you begin, Professor Blais, for 6 minutes. Thank you. First of all, thank you for giving me a chance to speak today. As mentioned, I'm Scientific Director at the Quantum Institute at Sherbrooke, and our research has led to 4 quantum startups led by students.
The ever-increasing power of modern computers, there are some computations of scientific, societal, and economic value, which are simply impossible to realize. Quantum computers promise to make some of these impossible computations possible. A quantum computer could indeed efficiently complete computations, which would take billions of years with today's fastest supercomputers. For some problems, the speed up offered by quantum computers is more modest. For others, there is no speed up at all. So understanding the real world quantum acceleration, which can be expected from future quantum computers, remains an open question. We don't know everything yet, and answering this question is made more difficult by the fact that we don't have fully functional quantum computers. However, the fundamental research and technological development towards the realization of these computers is accelerating at a phenomenal pace. In the last few years only, we've already went from very rudimentary devices to small quantum computers on the cloud. These devices can be used to test new ideas and to develop new applications. The price of entry to contribute to the field is no longer a PhD in physics. Although the current generation of quantum computers is still too simple to run large-scale computations, quantum advantage has already been demonstrated. In other words, the current generation of quantum computers can compete for some specific task with today's most powerful supercomputers. But how long before fully functional quantum computers become available? As already mentioned, fundamental research and technological development are still needed, and it will take time. But this is to be expected. Going from transistors to our modern computers took decades. And because its researchers are responsible for many key discoveries, Canada has a long history of excellence in the field and a solid reputation internationally. This has been made possible thanks to investments from NSERC, CFI, CFREF, CFAR, and others. And this has led to a critical mass of researchers with extensive expertise and state-of-the-art research infrastructure. In particular, the CFREF funding in Sherbrooke, Waterloo, and UBC give us the resources, the agility, and the long-term perspective needed to be competitive and have helped grow Canada's presence internationally. However, looking back, one can almost say that Canada's position in quantum research was reached by luck. It is the effort of individual researchers and institutions using existing competitive programs. At a time where other nations are investing strategically in quantum, for Canada to follow the same approach can only lead to one thing: a smaller role for its researchers in industry on the global stage. But of course, this is where the National Quantum Strategy enters and why it is excellent news. But to ensure maximum impact of the strategy, there are, in my opinion, a few aspects to consider. First, it is important to acknowledge that while it is an excellent effort, it is relatively modest compared to other nations. I'm convinced that it can have a large impact, but it remains important to manage expectations. Second, I mentioned that Canada's position in quantum was achieved by individual researchers and institutions using existing competitive programs. Of course, the national strategy is only now being deployed, but up to now, the investment appears to follow this same approach of relying on existing programs. There is a danger in this approach. We have limited resources and cannot excel in everything. Quantum choices will have to be made. But fortunately, quantum science and technology are more than one idea. It is not a winner-takes-all situation. Making choices may mean that we will lose some opportunities, but not that we will lose the race. Quite the contrary. And what are some of the important action to take to maximize the national quantum strategy's impact? First, over technology, talent is the real quantum advantage. It is important to attract and train talent at all levels, faculty, postdocs, graduate students, but also technical staff. Not everybody needs a PhD. At the moment, Canada's biggest export in quantum is probably talent. It is crucial to retain in Canada those that we train. At Institut Quantique in Sherbrooke, this has been on our mind since day one after receiving the CFREF award. We have taken action for our graduate students and postdocs to receive the appropriate training to become and support to become young entrepreneurs and to create their own quantum startups. The culmination of this vision is the creation only a few weeks ago by the provincial government of a quantum innovation hub in Sherbrooke with over 450 million in public and private investments. This will continue to grow the quantum ecosystems in Sherbrooke and more generally in Canada. It will help us retain our talent here, but also to become even more attractive internationally for students, companies, and investors. More initiatives like this are needed, as well as support to existing initiatives. Building on existing centers of excellence is also more generally an important way for Canada to remain competitive on a global stage. Over the last 7 years, the CFREF-funded centers, quantum centers have built unique research capacity, something from which the whole Canadian quantum ecosystem has benefited. Continued support of these centers of excellence will help Canada maintain its leadership. And so in summary, fundamental research and technological development are needed before quantum computers are available. The timeline is uncertain, the potential is vast, but expectations need to be managed. To have impact on a global stage, Canada needs a national quantum strategy that is ambitious, agile, and makes strategic choices. This is how Canada can remain at the forefront of quantum science and technology, helping drive our country's long-term economic and social prosperity. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Professor Blais.
Thank you very much, Professor Blais.
Mr. Lutkenhaus. Oh, and I believe you're on mute.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Norbert Lütkenhaus. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Quantum Computing. I'm working in the field of quantum information since 1993. More specifically, I'm working in the field in quantum cryptography myself. First, let me say a few words about what actually quantum information is. Alexander Blais already said something of the introduction. Of course, the main ingredient is quantum physics, which really talks about how the world works in the microscopic scale. And actually, we had a first quantum revolution by understanding these rules, and this one gave us devices. It's something like lasers, transistors, which of course then led to computers and so on, right? These technologies are actually what is driving today's high-tech industry, and you of course know them from your everyday life. Now, the second quantum revolution is actually now merging quantum physics with computer science and information theory. And the difference is now that we ask about questions about whole systems and not just devices. So what are these questions? For example, how to compute the answer to some mathematical question, which might sometimes sound very abstract, right? Like, how can I factor large numbers, right? We actually found over here that we have exchanged our view. What is a hard problem? What is an easy problem, right? We know some problems that quantum computers can solve efficiently, which conventional computers cannot. Another example for quantum information is actually that we ask questions like, how can I securely communicate over a channel so that an eavesdropper cannot listen into our communication? How we can actually secure our privacy over here. Here again, quantum information gives us tools at our hand how we can protect this privacy. So in this second quantum revolution, these new asking for systems, right? This is really this knowledge about these systems and the knowledge how to build them is actually what will drive tomorrow's high-tech industry. Now it's important for me to say something a bit about the time scale of it. In the end of the day, quantum information is a long-term game, right? But it has short and medium-term benefits and even benefits today. So why long-term game? Well, first, we know quantum computers solve particular tasks, right? Like breaking codes, simulating quantum systems. They're really good at that one, right? But what else can they do? And that is really a question of basic research, right? So we really have to find actually these applications where a quantum computer can as well help. And actually any problem that is computation intensive for conventional computers, right, where we run off computation power is of course a fair game to ask what it is. But we need fundamental research really to understand what really this advantage will be. The second thing is, of course, we need to build quantum computers that actually scale up, that you really can build into large computers. And this is a hard problem. But as Dr. Blair already said, we are making progress in that. So this is therefore a long-term goal. Now, the things we have as well advantages on the medium term, right? As we make progress into building these scalable universal quantum computers that can solve all the wonderful things, right? We are finding as well two things. A, the hardware that we're building is getting better and better, coming towards the universal quantum computer. At the same time, as we investigate which problems can be solved by a quantum computer, we realize there are more and more problems that need smaller and smaller quantum computers actually to work and have a crossover. So it's an interesting question about where does this crossover happen? What will be the problems? That is a field actually where today already academia and industry works on that one, because once there will be extreme high payoff if you find the kind of first crossover problems, right? But as well in the short term, quantum communication is actually ready for action, right? These are things actually we actually can build and develop, right? For example, for the quantum secured communication. And the Keysight satellite mission by CSA, which is led out of IQC, is one of the examples for this near-term development. And now the thing is we have even shorter timescales. There's even stuff that we can do today, right? And that is just something to do with the difficulty to build quantum computers. Quantum computers are difficult because just environmental noise can disturb them easily. So we really need to learn how to harness and control it. But the interesting thing is if you have a device which is very susceptible to the environment, then you can take this one, turn around and say, oh, let's use this device actually to sensor, as a sensor to actually measure small variations, electrical gravitational fields. So that is really the field of quantum sensors, which is actually something that we already see happening today. Now, if you think about the benefits for Canada of working in that field, of course, it's important thing in the quantum industry. And we know, of course, that quantum industry is involved not only on the short term, but as well as the medium and long-term activity already today. It's very important to realize that one. There's a forecast actually from the Doltech study that predicts actually an 8.2 billion of annual turnover and 18,000 highly skilled jobs by 2030. If you think about that one, that really means we need to build the workforce. For example, IQC is doing that in more than 20 years on all kinds of levels. And at the moment, for example, we train 200 graduate students that are working in Waterloo at the moment. And actually, our graduates are easily taken up as emerging quantum industry. And our colleagues in Sherbrooke and in Calgary, of course, as well, building up these programs. So this is really something we do jointly. The second point is really very important. We need to maintain this research continuum. Lots of progress that we're doing is as well based on basic research. And we have this funnel working on that one, right? So it's really important. Although we look at this short-term things like quantum sensors, they come because we have the bigger effort. Always remember, right? If you like cherries, right? You need to plant a cherry tree. You cannot grow the cherries themselves directly. Yeah, you have the whole system that you need. Third part as well, in now asking basically how do we structure it, actually shared resources, something very useful. In Waterloo, we have the quantum nanofabrication characterization facility, right? And this actually helps, for example, for incoming quantum industry to lower the initial investment threshold actually to become the game. And it helps the academic research community. And we have these networks and collaboration all over Canada actually to use that one. So together, actually, the availability of talent, academic excellence, and shared resources actually attracts investment for quantum industry, right? Be it just local startup companies, like we have 14 spin-offs from IQC alone, as well to faculty and as well postdocs and students, right? But as well other companies coming from outside. So it will be a pleasure to elaborate more on those points when you have questions about this one. And of course, I'm available for meetings either online or as one-to-one in person once I'm in Ottawa. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, très apprécié.
Thank you very much for this testimony. It's very appreciated. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Dr. Barry Sanders. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very lucky to go third because my good friends Alexander and Norbert did great pitches on quantum and why it's important. I'll just, before I go into my spiel, I'll just mention that we're a close-knit community. I've written papers with both Alexander and with Norbert. And so I just wanted to convey to you right off the bat that we're very fortunate in the quantum community because we get along, we all work together, and we're not fighting each other. And that can be kind of rare in the academic world. So I'm a professor in physics at the University of Calgary, director of the Institute for Quantum Science and Technology at the University of Calgary, and I'm lead investigator of Quantum Alberta, which is a loosely knit community of quantum scientists and technologists across Alberta. That's our vehicle to help us become even stronger in quantum science and technology. I'm also a scientist with the Creative Destruction Lab, both the quantum stream at the University of Toronto and the prime stream at the University of Calgary. In this role, I mentor and evaluate venture startups. And that's been extremely helpful because it gives me as an academic scientist a very good perspective on what it takes to make successes in the venture world. Now in Alberta, our strengths cover the spectrum of the strategic quantum areas that you've been hearing about. We work on quantum sensing, on quantum secured communication, quantum computing, and quantum materials. Those are, the names change and the number varies, but that's roughly the four that we talk about. Soon I'll be appointed as the scientific director of Calgary's Quantum City Initiative. That's a partnership between the University of Calgary, the City of Calgary, anchor industry partner Emphasis. Emphasis is an Indian IT company, which is setting up its World Quantum Computing headquarters in Calgary, and the province of Alberta. And Quantum City's focus, which I'll be leading, is about developing Alberta's quantum ecosystem. So it's not just the academic side, but really all levels to make sure that we have a successful quantum ecosystem that meets the expectations and needs of all stakeholders. Quantum City's priorities include collaborating with quantum scientists and technologists across Canada. I've been in discussions with Alexander Blais, with Norbert Lukenhaus earlier, and we're looking for ways that we're not trying to compete with each other. We want to find ways that we each understand complementary strengths and where we can work together to make great success. We also understand the importance of working internationally. So our priority is also to work internationally. As we've heard in this hour and the previous hour, the resources coming in are not sufficiently large that we can become the world's greatest. So we have to work strategically, cognizant of security issues, on how to make sure that we are working with others to make Canada great in quantum science and technology. Our own priorities at Quantum City are proof of concept and prototype development for quantum components, devices, and systems. We are working towards training a quantum workforce. We heard about talent. One of the focuses we have is not on training people in quantum, but training people who don't know quantum to be able to use quantum tools. And also our goal in Alberta is to maintain and enlarge our community of world-class researchers in quantum sensing, communication, and computing. I think of us as lean and mean. Alberta is a player on the national scene, but we have not had the same investment. We're very happy about that because, you know, other priorities have existed, but now we want to enter the stage at the same level, but not compete with the others, rather find ways to build on the strengths that have been established across Canada. I want to note that we're progressing quickly to establish the world's first professional master's degree in quantum computing. It's software focus with a plan to admit students in September 2023. We've been doing our industry discovery, and industry in Canada and beyond is showing great enthusiasm for taking on interns and graduates from this degree. I also want to finish by just mentioning another point that could be relevant to this committee. I maintain a strong international research and outreach profile. So my international activities are very important to me. I do a lot of outreach in Africa, but I also have involvements, strong involvements with China and with India. And I'm cognizant of security. Some of the questions that come up, and certainly in the past hour, do overlap. Sometimes, you know, I'm one of those people where, you know, in talking about security issues, all this kind of stuff, and my international activity, I'm sometimes a topic of conversation, and I just wanted to make sure people are aware of that here. I maintain the strong international activities, cognizant of geopolitical and all these other security issues. I do so because, partly because Canada is a great beneficiary of these international links. Many good things do flow to Canada as a consequence, and somehow we need to manage things so that Canada's needs and security are well looked after, but we don't cut off contacts with others if we can avoid cutting off those contacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. We'll start with, for our first round of questions, with MP Cram for 6 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us today on a Friday afternoon. In the first hour, the committee heard that the federal government was in the process of developing a national quantum strategy. I wonder if each of the witnesses could offer their input as to what they would like to see in the government's national quantum strategy. Any one of the witnesses, or preferably all, would be preferable.
Alexander, you can keep going first.
Okay. Well, I did address the national quantum strategy in my introduction. I did mention that being strategic about the use of these funds was important, and that making choice is something that we will have to do if we want to. We cannot excel in everything quantum. At some point, choices will have to be made. At the moment, the investments through NSERC are tagged quantum, but do not make any strategic choices. So this is good. It will continue to allow researchers to explore different avenues. That being said, I believe now that making strategic investments that bring together Canadian researchers around common goals would be a great way to go forward. I think if we can define community-based goals around which we can attract enough interest in Canadian researchers, we would have a chance to make research of large impact.
Okay, maybe I can add to this one. I think there are two aspects. Of course, we need to finance basically the infrastructure or research infrastructure. So what investments needed that we can actually build the thing, like our nano facilities. These are facilities that we need. But the second point is indeed, and I agree here with Dr. Blais, the thing is we need to have these projects that really say that are the things that the community thinks need to be done. And this one needs to be matched, of course, with the need of the government, right, of the industry. We will be going at the Institute for Quantum Computing, we will going by formulating actually these kind of projects as lighthouse projects, where I really say, we sit together and we say, these things should be done. And we will start marching on that one. And we really think that there's a really good discussion as well to have on the national level. Right. And indeed to think about those things, that we really define what are the things that we should be doing. I think that's very important part of the process. We should not just do funding of little projects here and there. We need to talk about strategy. Thank you.
Okay, I'll jump in. I like what I see being rolled out, and my Alberta colleagues like it. The way I perceive the National Quantum Strategy is it's different from the AI strategy from Genome Canada. It's really saying, we have existing mechanisms to provide funding. We'll do a quantum bump in funding. So it kind of lowers the bar a bit for all kinds of projects. There are big projects like CFI, MSI programs. There's internships through MyTax, et cetera. And I see this as a great step. It's a way that we have all these existing mechanisms. It doesn't put us in quantum on the spot, saying, you're somehow treated as special. And these different agencies are really experienced in knowing what they're looking for, vetting the proposals. So this idea of a quantum bump to every possible funding envelope and having us go through the normal procedure, I think is a real strength. It does matter to us in Alberta a lot because, again, in some ways we're a new kid on the block. And so how much do we direct our funding towards maintaining existing strengths versus letting up and comers step in? And I think this is a good way to do it.
All right. And Professor Blais, you said a couple of times that strategic choices would have to be made. Could you elaborate a little bit on what strategic choices will have to be made for Canada and where we should maybe focus our efforts and what areas might have to be left by the side of the road, so to speak? Professor Blais, I think
you're on mute.
Vous êtes en sourdine, monsieur.
Professor Blais, you're on mute. I'm afraid we can't hear you.
Pardon. Très bien. Donc,
So the translation should work now. I'll answer in French. So, one thing that inspires what I'm going to say is something that has occurred for several years in our neighbors to the south, two financing agencies, ARO and DOE, which send out challenges to the community. These challenges are established by the community, by certain stakeholders in the community, and the community has an opportunity to respond. And those challenges have to involve several research teams across the country. And in fact, they receive financing that includes even participants from outside the country. So those challenges are strategic choices done by the community, which recognizes what directions they think are most promising. And then in collaboration with those financing agencies, the choices are made and the financing is granted.
Merci.
Thank you, Professor Blais. That's all the time you have, Mr. Crum. Now I'll give the floor to Ms. Lapointe for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. And I'll share my time with my colleague, Mr. Dong. My question is for Professor Blais. Could you talk to us about the potential use of quantum detection or sensing, in particular in mining and in the medical field? I'm from Sudbury, so I'm very interested in learning what advantages Canada could draw from quantum computing in those sectors. Yes, thank you for the question. We talked a lot about quantum computers today, but an important idea, as I mentioned, is also that quantum is not a single idea. There are a number of different aspects in quantum in the quantum sector, and Norbert talked about that. One of these aspects is quantum sensors. These sensors, in fact, enable you to detect or to measure the properties of the environment more quickly, more efficiently than current sensors. So there are sensors all around us, intelligent phones in our cars. When you go to the hospital for medical imagery, they're all equipped with sensors. Quantum computing makes it possible to accelerate them and get better data. So now there's a company in Sherbrooke, SP Quantum, which is developing quantum sensors for the mining industry. So they can be placed on drones, and initial testing is being underway right now with the NRC. So those sensors can be placed on drones and could detect vibrations in the magnetic field, and these vibrations indicate the presence of deposits. So these are much more advanced than just quantum computers. So quantum computers could, for example, speed up and get better data when the time comes to do medical imagery. So right now, it's large-scale equipment. You have to put the patient inside. You could imagine much lighter or smaller structures like a helmet and equipped with quantum sensors that could do more rapid and more efficient medical imaging. So once again, we have Canadian companies developing that, and it's more advanced even than quantum computers are.
Merci.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Vivian, for sharing your time. Dr. Sanders, Dr. Blair, and Dr. Lukenhaus, thank you so much for coming. And if you can see my brain activity, you'll see fireworks. I already feel smarter after listening to your presentation. I just want to follow along what my colleague was asking. The theory of quantum computing is quite fascinating. But I want to hear from you that you're confident the application of the theory it's actually possible for our current technology to realize these applications. Because Canada, I speak in the context of we hear the government investment $360 million over 7 years, and then look at the other countries are investing a lot more. If we got to pick a lane, a certain part of this technology to gain a unique advantage over our competitors in the future, we better be sure that the lane is not going to a very short a dead end soon. So I want to hear from you your thoughts on this. Starting with Dr. Blair.
Excellent, merci.
Excellent, thank you. So it's a very good question. At present, well, everything seems to indicate that we will succeed in creating a quantum computer. all progress being done scientifically and technology is headed toward that goal. In spite of the fact that it's a difficult route and there's still a lot of progress to be made, we do not see any real roadblock or obstacle. So in recent years, we've moved from very small systems to online systems that we can really operate. But there remain certain challenges and things to be done. So on the one hand, the national strategy, which finances NSERC, enables Canadian researchers to explore all sorts of approaches toward quantum computers and toward that goal. However, when I talk about strategic choices, perhaps Canada could choose a few possible architectures and invest in those directions. However, I believe that it's possible to make that choice and not to have it be to the detriment of broader exploration that's necessary due to investment that's already been announced by CRSNG.
And any answer from your colleagues?
Yeah, I'm happy as well to offer some thoughts about that one. And yes, as Dr. Blay said, we are confident the quantum computer will come, and there's well studies from the Global Risk Institute that tell you a little bit from the community what we are thinking, what the timelines are. But I think as well it's very important to understand that the benefit from quantum computing, quantum information is not only the quantum computer itself. Already today, the quantum industry is acting on all aspects. If you have a quantum computer, you need to know what to use it for. That is as well some of what I said is some of the medium benefit, as well as we go in the building up the small scale or noisy quantum computers already, what is that they can be doing. There is already today the interaction between industry and academia to figure out those things, what can I use for. That is already as well part as well of the industry. It's not only the quantum computer itself, right? In addition as well to the spin-offs of technology for sensors and so on.
I'm sorry. So on that point, actually, it's a very good point. I previously asked government officials about semiconductors because semiconductor manufacturing capacity, to me, since we have this new technology, can compute much faster to get to, let's say, autonomous vehicles and all that future. We need semiconductors to embody this technology. Is that a field that you think that Canada should move towards to build our own independent semiconductor manufacturing capacity?
Very, very briefly, please.
Okay, as a very brief input for that one, one thing is the technology on which quantum computers will be based is not necessarily the same technology that today's conventional computers are based. So if we talk about today's semiconductor industry, that's not necessarily what we need for the quantum computer itself. So that is just the short input.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to MP Lemire for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. In particular, I'd like to mention to Professor Blay, when we started doing our processes to look into information on the quantum computing, it took me a little out of my zone of comfort, and I had a great deal of admiration for what's being done at the University of Sherbrooke, and today's presentation, in fact, confirms that. And I'd like to take the opportunity to let you speak about what we're seeing now. You mentioned that the current directions don't necessarily involve a strategic choice, except for perhaps military defense and national defense, as we've heard in the first hour. But I'd like to hear you on the priorities that the government ought to set, particularly regarding the financing and the research, both applied and fundamental. Thank you for the comment and the question. So there are a number of aspects to be mentioned. I'm not going to go back over the strategic choices, which I already mentioned, but there are a number of things I could say in answer to that. I would like to go back to the aspect of talent, among other things. So it's an essential aspect. And one aspect of technology we discussed is that you need people to make the technology, and we train a small number compared to what's necessary. And right now, that small number of people, they are being immediately hired by companies outside the country, students who are just starting their doctorate after 1 year, and then they're approached by several companies for what they'll do after their PhD. So we're in a strange situation. So we need to be able to keep those people here, and to do so, we need to create an ecosystem of businesses that we create here, startups and attract businesses here. So in order to create startups, I think the best approach is not to ask a professor to create it. When a professor creates a company, they create it and that stops there. Then we lose the pipeline of students because they leave in there and go off to their business. So we help the students to start up their own company. I think that's a win-win approach. And for that, I think there are some aspects that are probably missing. The industry, the investors in Canada are not as enthusiastic. It's a long-term investment, so the first few years, the time between university and having a company the size of D-Wave that we talked about, those first few years are critical. And I think there's a role for the national strategy in that. Of course, I'm hearing about the urgency of creating a collaborative ecosystem, particularly the academic sector can collaborate as well as SMEs, and the government can play a leadership role in that, and a role of leadership that leads to substantial financial investment so that Canada will not lose its advantage. We can talk about the urgency of collaboration with the environment, the sector, and this has influence on many fields, artificial intelligence, robotics, communication, blockchain, 4.0. So we hear a lot about these companies being able to work on a silo basis, unfortunately, and the government also works on a silo basis. What can we do to ensure better collaboration and exchange?
Donc, en fait, si je regarde les compagnies...
Actually, if I look at the companies currently working in quantum in Canada, they have interesting collaborations with the academic sector. I think, actually, it's not the case of all companies, but a number of the startups that have just begun quite simply have no choice but to work closely with the academic sector because their research that they're doing comes out of what they do in the academic sector, and it's still fairly basic research. So in order to be quite frank, at this point, I don't really think that's what the problem is in the quantum field. Those silos we talked about, I agree they exist in other fields. How can we make sure that the quantum industry will grow? Because I often know the government strategies are to put their money on a horse that will give them a good reputation, a good press conference, rather than stay open to a number of SMEs and stakeholders that could also perhaps, maybe in the short term, not so fast, but be the winning horses in the longer term. Well, I think that the Science Innovation Zone for applied the quantum in technology in Sherbrooke announced is a good example. It's based on excellent research, or excellence in research, rather, local expertise in Sherbrooke in the quantum sector, and the investments that are going to come in and help, as you say, to help those students start up their businesses and also to help outside companies set up shop around Sherbrooke. And what that will do ultimately is, first of all, the first student who's made a startup in Sherbrooke, that's very difficult. The next one is a bit less difficult, and then it becomes easier and easier because it becomes a more natural path for the students. And then in that ecosystem, you really have brings together the necessary talent. We need to move on to quantum technology. And also we have to become very attractive internationally. When people see Canada, Sherbrooke, and Canada as a whole, they say, okay, there's a whole range of opportunities because there are startups. Some of them are created, but some of them disappear, but 3 more are created. So because there's so much going on in the region. So those investments, I think, are essential. Thank you very much, because I think that the chair is going to tell me I'm out of time, and sometimes I stretch it a little, but I'll go ahead. Thank you very much. Exactly. Yes, thank you for respecting the time, Mr. Lemire. And now, Mr. Mass, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guest. Mr. Sanders, I noted, and I think it might have been you, and I'm hoping it is, because I'd like to learn more about this, was the quantum computing hackathon that was done. And I'd like you to kind of expand a little bit on that. I thought that was a rather interesting initiative. I know it's been going on for a while, but it seems to be really growing. And it's for social good is what it is, so people understand that. But was that you that was a guest speaker? I know you weren't involved in organizing, but I think a guest speaker. And could you maybe elaborate a little bit on that? Because I see these as exciting opportunities to to continue to push cybersecurity and also the goodness and what quantum computing can do.
Sure. Thanks for asking. Actually, that'll be next week. After this meeting, I'm heading to the airport and I'm flying off to Abu Dhabi. There, I'm working with New York University's Abu Dhabi campus, and the idea is to do a hackathon. It's called Social Good for the Arab World. I'm going as the quantum computing expert for it, and the hackathon brings in software engineers, computer scientists, people who want to build apps or APIs, just things that can go on your phone. And the idea is to do what I think a lot of people in this meeting are caring about. How is quantum computing going to fit into practical applications? And so I help out a lot in these things. Next week, I'm a guest speaker, but also a mentor and enabler. And the idea is that we want to take what quantum computing can do today. And I just want to be a little bit clear, we're hearing a lot, quantum computing is a long-term effort, but there's an area called quantum-inspired computing, which is where we think, what would a quantum computer be good at? And if we simulate a quantum computer today, could the benefits of the future come around today? Basically, thinking about what a quantum computer will do in the future inspires us to invent new algorithms today, like in optimization areas. And so part of what we're doing next week in Abu Dhabi is I'll be looking at what the inspiration of quantum computing is doing to drive new algorithms, how to incorporate those new algorithms into apps. And then I'm bringing some of my students from Calgary, and we're doing things like basically flight management. So we're working on problems like developing apps so that countries can minimize global temperature rise. We call that the objective function. So we're trying to find ways to say, given takeoffs and landings, altitudes, how do we minimize global temperature rise? And we're doing it all with quantum-inspired computing. So thanks for asking. That's what I love. And it just turns out that Abu Dhabi is the first place launching a hackathon of that type. So I'm helping them.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I noted, and sorry, I didn't notice. I just read 2 articles on it. I didn't look even at the date of when it was happening because it's in Abu Dhabi and they're not going to be anywhere near there. But what I found interesting though is there even discussion on even stuff for grocery store apps and things of that nature. And it's kind of interesting for me because I've been in dialogue with some of the grocery stores because they do have some apps now, and there's some ethical issues working over they have price differences, and then they have also it depends on whether it's a store or it could be the supplier, and there's a whole bunch of kind of ethics that are still in there. For this conference, though, is this mostly young people that are going to be involved in this? And then so you mentioned you're a mentor, and then is there any other is kind of a Canadian component to it? Or are you just kind of going there for our basically on your own? I'm just kind of curious how we fit in this. Because I think these things are really exciting because they do provide an opportunity also for the practical element for people to see.
Yeah, there's no official connection between Canada and what's going on in Abu Dhabi. It is a New York University Abu Dhabi campus thing. I'm the lead mentor and pushing it forward. So, by my association, Canada has a strong presence in this activity. I think part of this is really breaking new ground. It's and like you said, grocery apps, all these kinds of things. We really want to find ways to make quantum computing matter now and engage the software community. A lot of this is really physicists and computer scientists driven, but we really want to engage the software community better. So I look at this activity in Abu Dhabi as an experiment on my part. I'll go there, I'll learn a lot, and I'm hoping what I experienced there and what are the successes that I can bring it back to Canada, and we can start developing a lot more focus on the software side and using quantum inspiration to solve today's problems.
So maybe potentially next time we have you back as a witness, we could be related to Canada having hosted something of this nature, if that's not too ambitious. But it would certainly seem that these types of efforts are really worthwhile. So I think we'll follow up as well too, and how, that's where I see there would be a great role for the universities and for the government of Canada to help sponsor and kind of reverse the potential of losing talent as opposed to getting a chance to have people come to our community. I know that when I have a University of Windsor and St. Clair College in my riding, and when we host those events internationally, they're of huge significance to attract future star candidates. Thanks, Mr. Chair. That's my questions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Massé. And now Mr. Généreux for 5 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Sanders, I'd like to have an opportunity to be transported by my telephone to the House of Commons in order to have a hologram to enable me to vote in the House of Commons and not with a cell phone app. So thank you very much, all of you, for being there. Maybe I'm joking a bit, but it's quite impressive what we've learned from you. It's like Mr. Lemire, I thought to myself, what kinds of questions will we be able to ask? But I have a million questions I'd like to ask you. Mr. Blais, you talked about training, and the Quebec government has just announced substantial sums added to the Canadian sums. The Canadian strategy is being set up. And as regards training, you know that the CCTTs, the technology transfers at the college level and the cégeps at La Pocatière, we have one, and that you probably know. And then I looked at the UPTEC internet website, and they do quantum technology too. So we're talking about technical training. Is that part of what's in the national strategy? Do you know if there's something in there in the funding provided that will come down to that level? My answer is that I don't know whether it's planned, but I would say it's essential. As I mentioned in my introductory remarks, not everybody needs to have a PhD in order to contribute. Far from it. We need people who are experts in cryogenics, in parts machining. Otherwise, we won't be able to have any quantum computers. And in fact, the Quantum Institute hires a lot of people who come from La Pocatière, precisely because they have expertise here. The zone of innovation in quantum science in Sherbrooke works with the Sherbrooke CEGEP along those lines too. So that is a very important aspect. It's because, from what I understand, the government invests $50 million a year through the CNRC, which has an obligation to set up the strategies of the CNRC, or is it the government itself that sets the strategy? Can you clear that up for me? I think my understanding is that the CNRC has existing programs, the grants, Alliance, and FONCE programs, and there are amounts that go to the quantum study inside of those programs. Okay, so that will add further to what Quebec will contribute.
Doing the same, or in Ontario or wherever you are, Mr. Norbert? You're on mute.
Yeah, now it is good. Yeah. I mean, the training aspects, for sure, there's, for example, the NSERC grade training aspects, which is part of the National Quantum Initiative. So that is actually training on the graduate level. We at the Institute of Quantum Computing have been actually doing training on all levels. We start out with high school students. We have training elements for undergraduate students. We have training elements for the graduate student. I said we have trained 200 graduate students. We have as well training like CryptoWorks 21, which is actually a form of these NSERC grade programs, which we have been doing together, for example, with Calgary, where we do training between disciplines. And that is for the important area of cybersecurity and quantum safe cryptography, where you have classical cryptography not working with quantum mechanics at all, and basically cryptographers that work with quantum mechanical means, and bring them together so that these both communities come together and know about their respective advantage. So it's very important as well to make this cross connection. It's not only about quantum physicists having fun. It is really about bringing the different backgrounds together, and as well to teach people outside about what is that quantum can do and cannot do, and how can it be utilized. So these training effects are very important, and the NSERC Create is one of the tools, and it's part of the quantum strategy as well.
Merci.
Thank you. Regarding competition, Professor Blais, you talked about that earlier. You have partners around the world. Professor Sanders referred to that in New York and Dubai. And they're partners you work with, and they're also competitors. Who are your competitors, or what is our, let's say, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do we stand in the quantum industry around the world right now? Well, just to be sure I understood, you have the academic and the industry side, so there are two different aspects. So you want to know in the case of industry? Yes, for the industry side, the biggest players actually, Professor Lutkenhaus explained, that quantum had a first revolution with microelectronics that we already have, and now we're in the second revolution. And in a sense, Canada lost the first time around. Apple, IBM, Intel, and all that, they're not here. They're south of the border. So what that means is that now the big players, Google, IBM, Intel, and Amazon, who are investing massively in the quantum field, are south of the IBM was in Bromont also. IBM has a plant in Bromont. It's the only one remaining in the world. There's a quantum computer IBM factory that's going to be set up this year in Bromont. Mr. Généreux, I'm sorry, that's all the time you had. So it'll be another time. I'll give the floor now for 5 minutes to Mr. Fillmore.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and tremendous thanks to this panel. It's clear that much of the leadership in quantum computing in Canada resides with you, and we're very grateful to have you join us today. I would love nothing more than to crack into an exciting discussion about the details of the work that you do in your labs and how quantum computing works and will work. And on that note, I just want to say thanks to the committee's analysts for providing, I think it was Sarah, provided the very helpful working paper that made the concepts of quantum computing accessible to community members. So thank you thank you, Sarah, and to the analysts. But the committee, unfortunately, today is more focused on governance and creating the conditions for you to be able to do your work and to get Canada to where it needs to be, rather than on the details. I want to come back to this question. It's been raised a few times, but it needs to be raised again, I think, around the talent pipeline. The global context of cybersecurity and international security is changing, becoming more complex by the day, and Canada needs to be competitive in these fora. I guess I want to this is your opportunity to be very specific to the committee about what this national quantum strategy has to do to support the talent pipeline. Is the funding that's already been mentioned, does that cover the cost of recruitment and training, marketing, other things? Is more money needed? Exactly how would you see a strategy like this, a national strategy, being effective in creating a talent pipeline? And I would just open it up to anybody at all.
Maybe I can jump in first. I'll just mention that certainly in Calgary, we're looking at ways, similar to what's happening in Ontario and Quebec. We're looking for ways to be able to bring in the companies and have the talent. And as we've heard, we create talent, the talent leave Canada. That's a problem. Where the money and the governance can really help is kind of co-developing the two. So in Alberta, a chief part of the funding that we got in the recent Alberta government budget helps us to effectively subsidize talent development. So we're able to create these kinds of programs that are addressing what industry needs. And these are full cost recovery degrees. And so we set up professional degrees. Then we go to companies and we say, we are developing the talent. There will be talent. So if you set up a base in Calgary, we are putting through talent, and it's effectively zero risk because it's taxpayer dollars that are enabling us to be able to launch this in a managed risk kind of way. And if we don't do that kind of thing, we create the talent, the establishment of the companies comes later, as my colleagues have said, that, the students will go out and create the companies, but it's too late. We lose the talent. On the other hand, if we try to bring in companies and we don't have the talent, that's a problem. And I see this as a problem, but it's a solvable problem. I've had discussions with MyTax, which I think is an excellent organization for internships, et cetera. But this is a point I keep raising, is that we need to find a way that we're establishing deep tech talent. We have the dollars to be able to do so, and we're simultaneously bringing in companies, and we're marrying the two together. So a company setting up at a place is able to have the talent step into it. So the nutshell of what I said is we need to make talent development and company creation simultaneous. And that's a gap in the way that we're currently managing our quantum strategy.
Okay, thank you. Other comments?
Yeah, maybe I can do. One thing is indeed, one thing we really need when we talk about talent is we need to have enough people interested to go into the field. So, and that is something I think we all understand in Canada. We need to play together to really bring in more people in. And that's why we have this fun really going from high school students, really bring people into STEM, bring people into our field. This is already one of the aspects. Now, if you think about now talent to work as well to drive the quantum industry, there are really, again, two parts of it. And that is one thing, to have sufficient funding that we can hire enough graduate students, right? That we bring them to that level over here, and then they can as well go into work in the quantum industry, right? So that's really the one thing. And basically this, I think, is probably the core part of the quantum initiative as well, to make sure that we can do the research, and by that way, by doing the research, train the academic workforce for the for companies, right? And then another thing is indeed something that we have to figure out really how to work. That's something that Barry mentions. It is the thing about really to have the professional development. That means people who are not in the main quantum part, but would need to know how to work with it. Right? And we need to figure out how exactly now to make this one work. This is not in the part of the core academic part, but we need to figure out what instruments do we need to actually help to support that one. I don't have the clear answer to that one, but it's clearly one of the identified things that we think we need to take care of.
Okay, thank you.
Je vois Monsieur Blais, oui, brièvement, Monsieur Blais.
Yes, Mr. Blais, one last brief comment. Apart from the national strategy, what Canada can do to speed up? Can Canada speed up the visas for students or employees who want to come and work in that industry and be trained? In the U.S., for example, can we benefit from the fact that in the U.S. it's very difficult to get in right now, so maybe we could speed it up here and make Canada more attractive?
Merci beaucoup,
Thank you very much, Dr. Blais, and I'll give the floor to Mr. Lemire for 2 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your flexibility. Mr. Blais, I'll continue with you. Should we create an organization for industry standards and norms and allow more than one company to produce the same product and be part of the international market, for example, USB standards for connectors? It's still early to develop those standards, but it is something that is being discussed, perhaps not so much for the quantum computers, but for quantum communication and encryption. These are things where we have to start to think about that. And we also have NRC, which can participate in those discussions. I would like to hear you on intellectual property. How would it be, or how would you like to see intellectual property being handled, obviously, in Canada? Is the law sufficiently up to date and robust to support that in quantum? I can't give you a complete response in terms of one thing that was raised in the last round and what was mentioned is that it's really different between universities. So the reality is very localized in that regard. To your knowledge, as regards the level of, let's say, batteries, I'm interested in electric cars. What can be done? Can you undertake a knowledge transfer or appropriation of knowledge to contribute to the energy shift and the value chain for batteries? What can you say to us about that? 2 things. First of all, new materials, quantum materials, which are not yet, they don't exist yet, but we can develop them, which might have better properties. It's something that doesn't exist yet, but it's research to be done. Second thing, use quantum computers to simulate those materials or processes in order to improve batteries. So this is something which is being discussed, but it remains not possible to do with current generations of quantum computers. I like your answer. At the same time, are you concerned about certain materials being scarce, for example, critic strategic materials? Of course. My answer to that is that it's an important question. We could hope, but really it's part of, I'm projecting forward. We can hope that based on this work, we will find alternative approaches that don't use the rare earth metals that are hard to obtain. Thank you, Mr. Blais. It was a privilege to discuss with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And now I'll give the floor to Mr. Mass for our last questions for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe I'll start with Mr. Blais real quickly and go across the board. If you could give this committee advice, this is the first time we've had quantum computing actually studied in the House of Commons. If you could give us some quick advices where this committee should go next, or prioritize 1 or 2 things, what would they be? What advice could you give us? Start with Mr. Blaise and go across the board. I would appreciate that advice.
Oui. Oui, bonne question.
Yes, that's a good question. It's a very broad question. A number of things I could answer. First of all, thank you for taking the time to do this. So I'd like to go back to strategic choices for the national strategy to make sure that the national strategy isn't too spread out, doesn't sprinkle the money too far around, so that we make choices that can be difficult choices, but that I think they're necessary. So think once again about talent, as I mentioned earlier. The visas, I think that if it's something that's completely outside of the national strategy, but that would have a concrete impact right now on the entire community. Thank you. And I'm sure my colleagues will have something to add.
That, and that is really going in the same direction that Dr. Blaise actually said. The national quantum strategy should be more than funding programs that have quantum in the title, right? The thing is really, the important thing is the coordination between academics, the government, and industry. And so we need to have this vehicle that really comes together and really makes these focus points, says what is that we should be doing, building on the strength that we already have. That's also what you need to take into account. You need to talk about as well what are national priorities. For example, cybersecurity and being quantum safe is something very important. And you need this coordination. And I think that is the very important thing for sure to make sure that the strategy takes this coordination into account. Thank you.
I just have one comment. That's what the Americans call soup to nuts. So the thing to watch is the soup would be, the creation side, the academic. The nuts would be the final beneficiaries getting benefit out of it. And I think it's important to keep an eye, always to keep aware that full menu from soup to nuts.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Monsieur Mars.
Thank you, Mr. Mars. Dr. Blaise, and Dr. Sanders. It's important, and it's important to take an interest in quantum computing. Thank you for your knowledge. I wish you all a good weekend, all the members of the committee, and thank you to the interpreters, to the clerk, the analysts, and technical support. Have a good weekend, everyone. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good weekend. Thank you.